Welcome to Mythology, and I am Dr. Maria Kempinska, and my guest and friend and mythology partner is Dr. Anastasios Gaetanides. So two doctors having a chat about mythology. And first of all, I will tell you the story. We've agreed that this time it's about Psyche and Eros. In fact, it was Anastasios that put this one forward, and which I totally agree. It's quite an interesting myth, isn't it? Because it is so profoundly deep. And yet seems very light as well. I suppose because we all search for that love, that element of love in our lives, that we take it for granted sometimes. And perhaps that's why it wasn't at the forefront of the mythological themes that I was thinking of. But when you suggested it and I sort of started looking into it, and I thought, oh yeah, this is really important and profound. So I'm going to tell the story this time, and we can start discussing it. And when we discuss it, we'll be discussing it in relation to not only what it symbolizes at that time, Greek times, and why they chose it, but what does it mean today? And how do we look at Eros and Psyche and the element of love? And what does that mean to us, love, betrayal, and so on, all those themes that come with the myth, that each myth also is underpinned by various themes. So let's start with Once Upon a Time, because it's always a good place to start. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 3 wonderful daughters. And the youngest daughter was Psyche, who was the most beautiful out of all 3. Her 2 sisters, and they were famed for being beautiful, and the fame spread throughout the whole kingdom. Which meant that men were coming to the castle and men were coming to the kingdom to admire and to worship, particularly Psyche. And when they saw her, they would say that even Aphrodite couldn't match her. Now, Aphrodite was a goddess of beauty. Everybody knows about Aphrodite, Venus in Roman terms, but she was the goddess of love and beauty. And they used to say that although Aphrodite had these temples, that even Aphrodite couldn't compete with her, which made and they started abandoning Aphrodite's temples, which made Aphrodite really angry, and she was jealous, which is, let's say, part of the human condition, and in her case the goddess, her condition. So she asked her son Eros, who was the most beautiful, handsome man of all gods, to use his power and make what she called a little shameless girl to fall in love with the most vilest and the most despicable creature that had ever walked on the earth. And she told him to do so by piercing her heart with one of his love arrows, because as we know, the symbol of Eros, doesn't matter which age, he either has wings, he's either cherubic, or as we can see in Piccadilly, he has the arrow and he stands on one leg and he is focusing that arrow on the whole of London, which I absolutely love that. And I think we ignore it, but it's still there and it's quite central to the theme of London, the element of love. So what he would do, she said to Eros, is go and find Psyche, send one of your love arrows to her, that when she saw this most despicable animal, she would fall in love. And but when he agreed, it's his mother after all, but when he saw Psyche, he fell in love with her himself. Now he'd betrayed his mother, so he couldn't tell her that he'd fallen in love with Psyche. But coming back to Psyche at home, although she was the most beautiful and men adored her, she was sad and lonely because her sisters had both married kings. They weren't as beautiful, and they'd found kings to marry. And this has caused immense anxiety for her father and her mother. And because in those times, the child would have to be married off. The woman didn't work in those times in the same way. And the father couldn't understand why a king wouldn't marry her. So he went to visit the Oracle of Delphi and asked Apollo for advice and how to find a husband for his most beautiful daughter. And Apollo prophesied that Psyche, to be dressed in black, should be brought to the summit of a mountain and stay there alone, that the husband assigned to her would be a winged serpent terrible and more powerful than the gods themselves, and would come up and take her for his wife. Not a very nice thing, but at least she'd be married. So in the dark, the father took Psyche and she was left on the hill. And the daughter, being a good daughter, she did as she was told. As she's on the hill in the dark, a light breeze took her, and it was the wind of Zephyr. Zephyr felt sorry for her, and he took her from the rocky hill and he bathed her in the wind and to help her forget the pain and to put her to sleep. And when she woke up, she was facing a magnificent castle. And she realized the castle was destined for a god. And she intuitively knew that her husband would come to her at night. And she was right. She felt that at nighttime when he was close to her, and she heard his voice whispering sweetly to her ear. And of course, her fear disappeared and she fell in love with him. And even without seeing him, she was certain that he was not the monster. And she just fell in love with his image and what he said and everything beautiful. And this was a really deep love story at that moment. So night after night, Eros would come to her, and Psyche couldn't see him. And during the day, she was left alone because Psyche decided he couldn't show his face because he didn't want Psyche to know that it was him, and he didn't want his betrayal to his mother to be revealed. She started becoming very lonely, and she asked Eros, could her sisters come and visit her? She's lonely, you know, sort of, I'm on my own, I need people to talk to. And he was worried about this, and he said, do not let them influence you. If they influence you, they will destroy our relationship, and you'll have, and we will have, much suffering. So she agreed. And the next day, her sisters came. Of course, as sisters do. Who's your husband? And she said, well, he's a hunter. Well, who is he? What does he look like? And she said, well, I haven't seen him. Well, that's ridiculous. How can you possibly be in love with a man you've not seen? How do you know he's a hunter? How do you know he's gorgeous? How do you know who he is? And he might be the awful, terrible snake and the awful beast that the oracle of Delphi, as Apollo prophesied, is him. And of course, this played on Psyche's mind. So when her sisters left, she decided that night that she would find out who her husband is. And she took the candle, lit the candle when Eros was asleep, and a little bit of the wax of the candle, or they say it was oil from the candle, fell on Eros's face, and it woke him up. And she's, in the meantime, I mean, she thought if he's a snake, she'll kill him. And if he's not, and he's Eros, I'll go back to sleep and everything will be fine, and he'll be fine, and everything will be okay. But what actually happened was, when she woke him up, he was in pain, of course, because it was burned him, and he just ran off because she didn't realize the promise he'd made his mother. So Psyche ran after him, but it was dark and she couldn't see him. But all she heard was his voice saying, love cannot live without trust. And she started looking for him, and she spent days and days and looking for him, and she couldn't find him. And she realized she wanted to give her love to him. So eventually she went to the temple of Aphrodite and begged Aphrodite to speak to her son and ask him to come back. Now, Aphrodite didn't like Psyche, not because of Psyche, but because she was so beautiful. And so she gave her 3 very difficult tasks to do, as gods did. You know, this was retribution. This was your penance. This is what you've got to do to win back my favor. But actually, Aphrodite didn't really want to do that. She was incredibly reluctant. So gave her 3 very difficult tasks and placed her on a hill. And there was a dune of different seeds, wheat, poppies, millets, and many other types. And she said, I want you to separate all these seeds in the appropriate piles, the wheat and the poppies, all together by lunchtime. And of course, this was impossible. However, at that moment, as happens, a whole family of ants were passing by, saw Psyche's despair, And as magic happens in these stories and the great things happen, they felt mercy for poor Psyche and helped her to separate all the seeds. And Psyche then went back to Aphrodite. Aphrodite was a bit annoyed. Okay, I've got to give you the second task. And the second task was even more dangerous. She sent her to some black waters that were falling from a hill and told her to fill a bottle with the water. Now, all the water coming down any waterfall would leave very slippery slopes. And so Psyche knew that she wouldn't be able to do this. And this was even a harder task, as we know. But again, she was helped with an eagle. An eagle saw her, felt sorry for her, and took the bottle, filled it with water, gave it back to Psyche. And that was task number 2. Great. Almost there. Until she went back to Aphrodite, who gave her the most impossible task as the third and final task, which was to take a box to the underworld and ask Persephone, who was queen of the dead, to drain a little bit of her beauty into the box. Psyche took the path down to Hades, and she was crossing the river Styx, and with Charon, which is a symbol, a very important symbol, actually, in the whole of Greek mythology, and actually psychologically it's very important too, and to help her find her way to the dark palace of Persephone, which he did. And on arrival, Psyche asked Persephone, please drain a drop of my beauty into this box. And Persephone was very happy to help us, Psyche. Psyche did that, went back to Aphrodite, and Aphrodite, instead of being, okay, you know, you've passed the test, she was really angry, and she yelled at Psyche, and she said, that's it, you're staying with me, you're going to be my servant. I'm not going to let you go. I don't care whether you've done everything I've done. You know, you're not
I'm a goddess. I decide to do what I like.
I'm going to be the one in charge. And you've done the task, but who cares? I can change the rules. And at that moment, the gods felt sorry for her. And they sent Hermes, the messenger god, to tell Eros, who had no knowledge of this, all the misfortunes that his wife had gone through to get back his love. This was her searching for him. And he was so touched when he heard the stories that it healed the wound of betrayal. So he found Psyche, and Psyche was now in his mother's garden. And from that moment, Eros and Psyche lived happily together. He decided he will stay with Psyche. He'd forgiven her. They were happy. And Psyche persuaded Eros to forgive his mother and for what his mother had made her suffer. And they decided to marry. And as a wedding gift, Zeus made Psyche immortal and allowed her to taste ambrosia. Ah,
yes,
sweet nectar of the gods. And even at that point, Aphrodite was happy because now Psyche was living up in the sky with her son, and the men on earth had forgotten about Psyche, and she could restore all the temples, and they now adored her on earth. Isn't it a wonderful story? But it's almost at the same time, it just hints at all those elements, all those themes of betrayal, the dominant mother.
Yes.
The son who has to do what he's told. But also, wasn't Eros wasn't he the fourth god? There was, as far as I know, he was the god of love, and then you've got Gaia, chaos, Tartarus, the abyss, and Eros. So he, in all Greek mythology, and all that, not only that mythology, but generally in life, Eros, love, is one of the most powerful, let's say, attributes that we have. It's how it's like, you know, they're looking for CERN, in CERN, you know,
The Higgs boson, right?
Higgs boson. They were looking for that, you know, the God's particle in CERN. And they built this big ring that they, you know, all these protons collide against each other. And then years later, they find that Higgs was right, that there was a God's particle. And it's almost like that. It's almost an element of a God's particle. It's mysterious, but it's there. And we recognize it when we feel it. Or we recognize it when we don't feel it, or it's betrayed. But we can't actually find a chemical that, wouldn't that be great? Why do they
but
make
it would be.
Instead of doing CERN to find, you know, sort of something that could be quite disturbing, why don't they find something that finds the chemical for love? Because that
that would be amazing. But I think we, you know, of course, you know, at the end of this, you know, it's also a kind of combination of chemicals that produce this type of feelings. But you know, but instead of being reductive, there is something about the story as well that a little bit like the Higgs boson, we can't see it, but it's there. But you know, if you see it, then you know you don't trust it's there. There is something about Psyche that needs to trust that you know that her husband, irrespective of how he looks, he, you know, is going to be someone who loves her and she loves him, not based on the image and how he looks. This is a story a lot about appearance and, you know, and depth. How a love thrives, not you know, not simply in terms of only be captured by the image, but also thrives on going beyond the image, not being captured by the image, but actually being able to stay with the trust of who the other is, without having to see the other, you know, as you know, in terms of appearance. And I think, you know, there is Eros who falls in love with Psyche in terms of her beauty, but what solidifies the relationship is also, you know, that they are building a relationship of trust based on him not showing himself to her, and her having to trust that he's not this winged serpent, but he's a, you know, whoever he is, even if it is the winged serpent, there is love and there is tenderness and there is care that manifests, and there is also sexual attraction that manifests without being based on in the middle of the night when none of them can see each other actually, because Eros cannot see her in the darkness, right?
But
her beauty is not
of who she is. He's already
yes, but he can play that in his mind, but fundamentally they don't see each other, but then she can also imagine whoever she wants to imagine. She doesn't need to see him.
But isn't this sort of almost a passage of right in a relationship? It's almost that you fall in love at that moment. You don't see somebody clearly. It's that honeymoon period that everything is going to be okay. And that moment, what is activated, there's almost some magnetism, and it is almost an intoxication that takes over.
Yes.
You fall in love with somebody and you don't really know them. And then gradually you start getting to know them. And then the trust falls away because actions are taken that do betray. Can you stay together through that intensity of various elements of betrayal?
And also, can you stay together? Because there is something about the betrayal that Eros feels, that Eros postulated that you shouldn't see me, you shouldn't allow your sisters to influence you. You know, why we have what we have, why is it not enough? But, you know, you can see that perhaps it's only human that Psyche would like to catch a glimpse, you know, to be curious. She's curious. And in many ways, she betrays his trust. But at the same time, she tries to win it in the most sort of painful way possible. And I think there is something about her that she also needs to, the crucial task is the third one, that she needs to drain her beauty a little bit in order to allow for appearance not to play such an important role, in order to win Eros back, not on the basis only of her beauty, but also of how she will go over and above in order to win the love of the person she wants and she loves herself. So there is something here about, you know, going through the stages of love itself, you know, not being captured by the image and appearance, the trust in its betrayal, and how you regain trust and how you become reliable to your partner as well.
And also it's that he, at that point, doesn't want to be seen because he doesn't want to betray his mother either.
Yeah.
And in a way, by her wanting to see him would mean he has to betray and move away from his mother, stand up to his mother and totally accept Psyche. And it wasn't until she had truly proven herself did he say, no, I want you. And then the mother had to accept them together.
Yes.
And
yes.
Almost that element of when there's a devouring mother, a mother who is so powerful. And, you know, all psychoanalysis deals with this, doesn't it? Klein and Freud, and everybody agrees that if you have a mother that is devouring and overbearing, that they can actually ruin a child, and they influence a child, of course, as we know, as to the next person that they will marry. And, you know, is the person going to be like my mother? Am I going to have that relationship? But Psyche has to be strong enough to take him away from Aphrodite as well.
Yes.
And
well, Aphrodite was not giving up easily. I mean, even towards the end, she wasn't willing to give her son up or to give her own power up. But I think there is something here about, you know, women and beauty in a way, and Aphrodite having beauty as her powerful weapon, and this being taken away by a mere mortal, Psyche. And I think there is something about that the power that women have in a kind of patriarchal system is that of which is ascribed to them and then creates jealousy and competition, is that of beauty. And if someone else is more beautiful, then they feel, you know, somehow, especially a goddess that has a power of that beauty and being worshipped for her beauty, that to have this been taken away is a big insult in a way. So it almost sets women against each other.
Yeah, because, and also coming back to the patriarchal system, and, you know, the patriarchal system is that the strongest will be at the top. And women engage with this as well, you know. So,
yeah, of course.
You know,
they play the same game of power, but instead of being, you know, the power of the politics or logic, I mean, for them, that's beauty becomes the one of the most powerful weapon, and in that sense, it sets up the competition in the sphere in which it was assigned for them from patriarchy, and of course, the sphere of beauty, which of course even today is mostly assigned to women and men, but mostly women again in terms of fashion, in terms of, you know, appearance, media, etc., etc. There is always beauty that becomes something that a woman is both has to be blessed with, but also it can be a curse. You know, especially with an incredible, beautiful woman, that she might find it really hard. You know, there creates jealousy, envy, and competition from other women as well. You know, and I think this shows how if the only thing that you rely on is your beauty, then if this is taken away, then of course you will feel very envious and very, very jilted when someone is taking away the only thing that is you base your power on. And that's the danger in any system that creates a kind of, this is my only currency, beauty, right? And if this is, and for Psyche, she needs to move beyond her beauty and to find other currency. I mean, her trust, her love, her working hard, making, you know, completing this task, asking for help.
Yes, and being humble enough to forfeit some of her beauty.
Yes, to allow for something else to emerge.
Yeah, and, you know, to get ask for forgiveness, and it is exactly that. You do, you know, you divest yourself of that element and go deeper, because that whole going into the underworld is just that movement, isn't it? I'm going to look internally and see what else I have here, and oh my goodness, you know, my behavior was wrong. But she came from quite a naive position. She was, it was beautiful. It was given to her. It was almost ordained. And how difficult must that be? But we all know that the power of beauty is exactly that. People get drunk on the power of beauty. You know, Marilyn Monroe is still iconic. And although her beauty actually sort of was accentuated in various ways, let's say, because of the whole of the sort of the film industry. Nevertheless, she's still iconic because she's got that vulnerability, that sort of almost the naivety, vulnerability. She was actually in an orphanage. Her mother was very ill, mentally ill, didn't have a father. And there was this vulnerability and this need that came across from her, which is incredibly sad that she had, you know, sort of, she portrayed, but she did that so well that people bought into it. So there is that element of naivety, the vulnerability, plus beauty that actually is so magnetic for men.
Yeah, but this is also, but it also shows how she will. There was something performative that in order to be with a man that in her life she needed to be what they wanted her to be, and in many ways she will just adapt to the needs of the men in her life in order to please them and fulfill. But then she felt dissatisfied and bereft herself, and the things that she wanted, perhaps, you know, to have a child of her own, which she was denied, made her very depressed and very lonely. But there is something about also what men project into this sort of, you know, women that, you know, they have to, and then women have to adapt to the fantasy, to the fantasy woman and perform this fantasy woman that the man creates in order to fulfill their expectations. Instead of actually assuming their own position as women and, you know, fulfilling their own needs and having their own sort of personalities, not based on the fantasy that men create for them. But that's very difficult. That's very hard to do, especially in a society that we live that is based a lot on appearance and a lot of fantasy, which is created both by the film industry and also these days by pornography as well. You know,
pornography is such a big one, but coming just to tie up with Marilyn Monroe, she married Arthur Miller, the writer, and he was again totally intoxicated by her, drunk on her beauty, and she was drunk on his intellect. So she was an, you know, sort of a voracious reader. That's what she absolutely loved on him. But what she forgot, and he didn't realize, that she wanted his attention. He wanted her to adore him.
That's right.
At the beginning, and that is the beginning of the relationship there. And that's the problem that people have when they come together and they're not really suited. So she was incredibly needy for attention. Of course, she didn't have it as a child, and you know, because her mother was unwell and was taken to hospital, so she was abandoned effectively. But she needed his attention. He needed her to adore him. But just sit there and adore me. Don't talk. Don't ask anything of me. And I, you know, in the beginning of most relationships, it's that area that is forgotten, because at the beginning, all you see is the aspect of them that is accentuated, the intelligence or the beauty, and don't ask for anything more than that. I will feed your beauty. I will adore you for your intelligence, but don't ask me to give attention.
But that's also what is important in the fact that in the darkness, when people don't see each other and they don't recognize that there is something, that love exists in this darkness, and trust exists again when you are not. It's not about evidence. It's about faith in the other. That, you know, you don't have to see the evidence in order of the beauty or the intelligence of the other to really trust them. You need to actually go beyond what appears in order to find what is underneath. And of course, you know, sometimes there might be very little underneath, and that is also very disappointing. You know, I think that's why sometimes love exists in the absence of. You know, the most powerful love exists in the absence of the other, in the absence of the visibility of the other, in the image of the other. You know,
that was Dante's Inferno, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
He only had a glimpse of Beatrice on the bridge, and suddenly this amazing creative concept happened, and it's much more than just a story, isn't it? It's so
absolutely.
It is almost a sort of a piece of theatre in in life that he created, and he only had a glimpse of her. There was something in her. It's like Mona Lisa. People have a glimpse of Mona Lisa, and it can be transformative.
Yes, I mean, this is also the power of beauty, but it also shows how we create the lovers through our imagination. And then, you know, a relationship to survive, this imagination is to withstand the test of time and be disappointed and be betrayed and be tested through trials, tribulations that, you know, someone will go through in order to arrive at a point of security and a point of trust that, you know, that is being tested through time and through possible betrayals. I think, you know, sometimes the most the relationships that survive and they to get transformed are the ones that on some level they experience some type of rupture or betrayal, which is repaired.
If as you say, that betrayal has to be accepted, as Eros did. He was told by the gods, look, she has done all this to win back your love. She has, you know, atoned for her mistakes. I really like the theme of atonement. I really think that we underplay that, you know, or it's ignored. That people should and do atone for their mistakes, or, you know, I mean, they always put it with the Catholic religion, and there's certain elements of the Catholic religion I like, which is that I can atone for my mistake. And people do atone for their mistake, and if the other person can accept that. So I've had clients that have had problems in their relationship. They've gone off and somebody's had an affair and they want to stay in the relationship. Can the other person accept that betrayal? And what is the betrayal? Is it, as you say, is it porn? We were touched on that. Or is it an actual affair? And some people can overcome the affair.
Yes.
Carry on and say, well, you know, I can forgive them because it's just that moment, but they come back to me.
Yeah, but I think there is something also about not simply the experience of the betrayal, but also the experience of what is my contribution to the relationship, and how the relationship itself, you know, cannot provide something that is sustainable, and someone will look outside it to find it. Why is someone looking outside the relationship to find if he cannot find it inside it? And I think, to be honest, relationships are very difficult because we're asking from one person to fulfill too many requirements. We both are trusted partner who we love and support and feel very close to, but also the desired sort of other who will incite our desires and our wants and make us want to have sex with them and to feel longing and connection with them. But all of this, sometimes desire and love might not quite sit very well with one another. This closeness might also work against the mystery that desire requires, which requires a little bit of distance as well. So it's a very delicate balance to want from one person to be everything. And of course, this is also the task, which that's why it makes it such an important task and such hard work sometimes, to stay in a relationship, having to work on all of these elements instead of doing the easy thing of splitting. Here is where I find love and trust, and I will find desire outside it, you know, or vice versa, you know. A lot of people can find a lot of sex and desire in the relationship and then find trust in a trusted friend outside, right? And there is an emotional affair they have. They might not have necessarily a sexual affair, but they have an emotional affair. So it can happen both ways. And I think this is very, very interesting in many ways that this is the case. But I think something else about the myth is in terms of the psyche, if we see it as a way of psyche's development, how our psyches develop and reach a point of where we can reach. It's almost like a journey that the psyche needs to take through different encounters. First of all, encounter with her beauty, then with Eros, then with Aphrodite, and finally with Persephone. the underworld, and eventually, you know, with Zeus and becoming part of the gods herself. There is something about, you know, a kind of journey, a trajectory, which starts with appearance, beauty, and then gradually elevates her into something more transcendental.
Exactly. This is why I did my PhD both in Freud and Jung, because I think together they give us a package, if you like, for our psyche, because her journey is both Freudian at the beginning, you know, that love, that ability to fall madly in love, and it's sexual and it's erotic and it's arousing, and then you go through the journey of wholeness. How do, for yourself, you know, when you start looking at yourself, it's quite shamanic, this story. You know, encounters the ants, the eagle is very shamanic.
The eagle, finding an eagle who is helping her, and the ants, and finally, you know, the catabasis going into the other
to go into the depth,
into
almost
the depth,
you know, where we encounter death, Thanatos, Eros. You know, can we encounter that moment where we give up our independence? We say that this love has more value together than two people separately.
That's
and
right.
I value the love that we have here, which everybody's love is different. Every couple.
I mean, this is, you know, this catabasis is the very notion of surrender, right? You surrender your own egoistic position of you being the most important and prideful person, and you realize that, you know, the other is also quite important, and together you create a third.
Yeah.
And I think this is also the basis of relational psychoanalysis, that somehow, you know, it's not about submitting to the other, it's about surrendering of your own sort of egoistic position, of your own narcissistic sort of importance, and saying that I'm not the only important person here. We can be together, and we can both be important, and we can create something out of this sort of meeting together, this mutuality. And I think in order for this to happen, there needs to be a lot of, you know, exploration, conflict, betrayal, enactment, a lot of things that can actually be tried and tested through the time in order for relationship to survive and thrive and, you know, progress. But it requires some form of, you know, catabasis, going into the depths of one's psyche, one's soul, and saying, you know, well, perhaps my beauty is not the most important thing here. My own sort of pride is not the most important thing. But the other is also important. So I can lose a little bit of that. It's okay, as long as I can meet the other. And I think that's why I see this also a symbolic journey of you know, even in a Jungian form, a symbolic journey of the psyche, starting from the very basic sort of drives that drive you to connect with the other and meet the other, be captured by the image of the other, and seeing this, and finally arriving at the point where she's overcoming all of this and going through the dark night of the soul.
Yes.
Going literally in the underworld and emerging, meeting, you know, something dying in order to be reborn. Reborn as someone new, someone, you know, someone then also who will attract the attention of the gods and Zeus, and who will grant her immortality.
Because that form of love between, I think, people is a higher love. It's a fact, you know, sort of, you got the familial love, haven't you? Agape, or the love for the world. It is a sort of, that's the tragedy of the English language. Love means something to everybody. But we're talking about the separation at the Eros and the love for the world and the love for the other. And it is a higher love. And I think the aesthetic nature of love is where they put Eros and Psyche eventually. That love per se can conquer everything. That you have to make that promise, if you like, in a relationship, if it can work, when you've gone through all the trials. Does this work? Does it not work? And when you've agreed that this together, as Jung was talking about, the correct chemicals, when two people come together, the correct people come together. The power of that nature is so immense that it can be explosive in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredibly powerful. Or
it could be, yeah.
Or it can be destructive. And at that point, when you've worked it out, you work, do we stay together? Do we leave? There was a time when nobody ever left. But let's go back to, before we go back to the wonder of the couple finding that sort of aesthetic beauty of love, to porn. Why are people turning to something that is so erotic, the erotic nature of love, as opposed to the relationship of love? Because
well, is the road of least resistance is something that, you know, instead of meeting the real other, there is the fantasy other that is constantly bombarded by images of sexuality that are very provocatively creating desires of all sorts, especially to young people who are falling more prey to that, and not, of course, older people as well, but it can become, because of its nature and because of internet porn these days, it can become very addictive. And like any addictive substance, you get hooked on it, and it's very hard to create a dependency. And it's the easy way then to find satisfaction instead of, and it makes you not want to try to get out of this fantasy and this image of pornographic sort of relationship to a real relationship out there, which you will try. And of course, even in real relationships, we battle with our fantasies and imaginations of the other, and we need constantly to test the reality of the other against our own fantasy. I mean, there is no relationship without the fantasy of the other. But and what we actually sometimes we project and we try to transform the other into. And of course, we battle anyway with that. But with porn, there is another layer of, especially nowadays. I think it's not simply porn in its raw form. I mean, our whole culture can be seen as being very pornographic. You know, using sex in order to sell, to commodify, to turn everything into. So a lot of people, for example, who try to abstain from porn, they find it really hard when they watch social media or a movie, which of course will create a kind of scene which might be pornographic in its own construction. So again, our whole culture is based on this using sex to sell and to create commodity out of sexualized images. So it's very hard for people to find who want to abstain, to not to be bombarded by a culture which constantly turns everything into, uses sex as a powerful commodity. And I think that's why it becomes such an addictive substance. And I think we are faced today with the internet addiction, and porn addiction is on the rise, is one of the most significant ones. And we didn't have that problem, let's say, 30 years before, where porn was there. Someone could be addicted to it, but it wasn't, it didn't have this accessibility. You can't find it, you couldn't find it. And there was this sense of, newness, we call them, supernormal, they're called supernormal stimuli, because it's like, McDonald's, they contain high calories, high intensity, high newness in very short time, and they create both sensitization and desensitization at the same time,
And I think that, as you say, sort of with pornography, it is so accessible. And it makes people, it's very narcissistic though, isn't it? It's all consuming. It's all about you in that moment. And, so when I have clients who are like that, the whole element of relinquishing that to actually the part of surrendering that this relationship is worth it. And you have to get to that point where the relationship's worth it. But at that time, what people forget is I'm not sure how many women are addicted to porn. There used to be a time.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's a very huge number of women now. And it's on the increase, because in the past we saw pornography as something belonging to men, but actually women are becoming very addicted. And actually it's becoming something that a lot of young girls actually using. Billie Eilish, for example, she came out saying how she was affected very much by watching pornography, which was a way of also overcoming her own traumas and her own difficulties and the bullying that she suffered as well at school, and how she used that as an escape. it's very easy, and also, it's a kind of vicious cycle. I mean, it's easier to watch porn in order not to engage in real relationships, in order to find a way to alleviate some pain or some trauma. But then the fact that you're watching porn and you get hooked on it and you get addicted to it, it makes it very hard then to turn into real relationships. So, the people who become addicts, I mean, by the very nature of it, it makes it harder to give up that for something that is more available and harder to work on. So I don't think it's necessarily simply kind of narcissistic predilection. I think it is something that is in the nature of addiction itself that makes it very hard for people.
But the intention to go there is narcissistic, isn't it? You start
Wow.
by,
Yeah.
it's
But sometimes it's like young kids wanting to see some beautiful men and women. It's not necessarily that they want to get addicted or it's narcissistic. They just it's available and it's accessible and they want to.
Yeah, it's the same as drinking drugs.
Exactly. If it becomes there, it's so accessible. You are an adolescent. You just you have all the sexual urges. You just happen to be upon a site that is so readily available that all the all the blockers that parents put in, the kids will find a way to access it. And so it's and then the one thing leads to the other, and before they know it, they watch 4, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours porn a day, and they can't do anything else. And it's becoming more and more prevalent these days. And I think the parents, themselves, they need to be quite vigilant about the threats of porn addiction and internet addiction and gaming and all of this stuff.
Exactly, because it is monetized.
Monetized, of course.
It was Freud's nephew that introduced the whole sexualization of advertising, Bernays, in America.
Yeah.
So he's the one that, so you see the line, the Freudian line. I blame Freud for a lot of things, actually. I blame Me Too for Freud. Me Too blame Freud. Because I've had people say, oh, it's not me, she wanted this. My daughter, somebody, oh no, I even had mothers saying to me, oh, my son really looked at me with those, sort of eyes that he loves me. There was eroticism there. And I say, there's something else going on here. Don't.
Yeah.
Let's be careful of what you're saying here. And
yes,
a little bit of Freud, and then they misinterpret it. So I do blame him.
I'm not sure that it was Freud that made that popular, or whether there is something already there that people actually, distort and accentuate and distort and use it, right?
Yeah, but they use it as a terminology that gives it viability, credence.
Right. I know.
Into the public domain, let's put it like that. Yes, so I agree with you. There's always a reason why they're saying that. Well, what's going on in her own life and so on. But, it's now become a fig leaf that hides. It's a thing that people can use. Oh, well, he said so, so it's okay. I like to do that about Freud. Let's find that. But coming back to the stepmother or the mother-in-law here, Aphrodite, the woman who was jealous of this other beauty. And in those days, when we're talking about Greek tragedy, your capital as a woman was your beauty. You could get away with so much if you, Helen of Troy, created.
Oh my God.
Yes.
But my God, the consequences of beauty are tragedy, really, and pain and war and suffering. They don't seem to be something that can be enjoyed very much.
No, but that's not because of her, though. It's because it's what it does. Because if somebody is beautiful, if you stand inside the head of somebody who's beautiful, they know they're beautiful. They don't know they're beautiful because they're inside themselves. So it's how people perceive them. And very often it starts with the parents, the mother, and the world around. Oh, what a gorgeous child. Oh, and they are more forgiving, it says. Parents are more forgiving of a child that's beautiful and sweet.
Yeah, of course.
There is more time to be given to that child and so on. And then it's extended to the school and the outer world and so on. And then you're adored. And then if you're famous, everybody says yes. It's a problem of faith.
Yes. But there is a price to be paid for that, because
but it's not your fault. Is it the person who is beautiful? Is it their fault? Because in those times she couldn't control her beauty, but the people who could control the repercussions of that, the destruction, were the people who wanted to own her. And
but that's why I said it's also, we need to see it within the context, and how we can see the context of that beauty existing within the patriarchal system, and how he wanted to be possessed by the others. Eros himself, wants to possess her, right? He wants to captivate and have the beauty all to himself. He becomes, that become in itself very narcissistic. It's mine. You're my precious. I want you, right? This is exactly what happens. And of course, in the attempt to possess beauty, we can also spoil it, or we become jealous of it. I mean, Aphrodite is jealous because she's stealing something, stealing her followers away from her. But also, people want to spoil it by possessing it. Is mine, and perhaps also to devalue it and to destroy it, because it becomes too much. It's just a little bit too powerful, and we are afraid of the power that exercise over us. I think that's part of the danger that beauty exerts on others. And I think it's not necessarily it's not the fault of the person who's beautiful. Obviously, they haven't. It's how this beauty is constructed, and then the context into which it takes place. But people feel envy about something that they cannot produce themselves, and they want to destroy it. And they want to possess it, or they want to destroy it, or they want to capture it and make it theirs. Because we have that again and again, how someone who's very beautiful becomes like a trophy wife, or a trophy husband, or a trophy this or a trophy that. This is this idea, right? I will put it in a cage. It's like a beautiful bird. I will put it in a cage and will sing only for me. This is the idea.
Until Dorian Gray, until they die, until they get old, and then they are
they replace with a newer model,
with a new younger model. And that is very scary. That premise, but it goes on. But I think here, it is that identifying that element. But I've been around beautiful people, and there is a magnetism about they do harness something. They have got something. Now, whether it's because they are used to people saying how beautiful they are, but they somehow, people's heads turn towards that person.
Of course. Of course, but
and it's male and female.
There is a sense of aura that they emit, but also there is something, as you said, maybe it was cultivated, maybe they realized that how much power they exert on others, and they use that power. But actually, the people who it can lead to the opposite. I've seen a lot of very beautiful men and women who they're trying to downplay their beauty. They're trying to do that in order to be able to not have this currency, not have this attraction, because they find it also quite problematic. It led to a lot of disappointment and a lot of very problematic relationships. So you can see them perhaps being with partners that are not actually, they are not beautiful at all, or quite the opposite, right? In order to have that sort of connection, which says I can choose anyone, but I choose someone who's not beautiful, right? So because they want to be seen not simply as beautiful, but the interesting, the more they downplay it, the more beautiful they become.
Yes, because you then realize that they have beauty beyond just the facade. How annoying is that?
Is that right? They cannot escape it. It's almost great. It's like a curse.
Yes, it's great. At the same time that they have actually thought about that.
Yes.
I've met women like that have married, sort of men that are not quite the same sort of beauty standard as them, and they're extraordinarily happy, because the truth is that just because you're beautiful, once you're in a relationship, it doesn't mean that that person's going to treat you well.
Yes.
They don't polish and shine you like they do a great car. There's always those elements. This is why I like Klein's work. The anger, the hate, the envy, the greed that she recognizes in all of us, that happens right from babyhood.
And I think I think she recognizes also how the beauty of the mother, because I mean, in Jungian terms as well, the mother is the earth and encloses everything. Is the universe. She's everything. And then gradually we get ourselves out of her and, claim our own individual existence. But that creates a lot of, everything in her, everything is nature, is the universe. And in many ways, she's all powerful. That's why we had goddesses before we had gods, in the history of civilization. The power of the mother, the maternal, of enclosing the universe, and how this beauty, this power, in a way, is quite frightening. And for patriarchy to exist, it needed actually to separate violently itself from that sort of everything and start to destroy it. And in many ways, the consequence of patriarchy is actually the destruction and the control of nature and the control of women. Right? These two came together.
That's quite an interesting one, because the feminine nature, the chaos, sort of the world that is out there, the infinite world, they call that chaos, sort of outside our planet, which they thought was shrinking at one time. Scientists said, oh no, the galaxy is shrinking. But no, the more they go out, the more they realize it's expanding. It's eternal. And that needs to be harnessed somehow. We need to make sense of that. And only by this sort of masculine psyche, the psyche of containing it, putting it somewhere, the framework to a picture, is important. What do you put around it? How do you make sense of all of this? And I think that's why the joy of the masculine and feminine coming together is so powerful. And I actually am disturbed always by women who say, oh, we don't need men. And they become like a man. Or the element of the masculine that they hated, they step into that shoes. So, a lot of women are left with children to raise because they've got rid of their partner. Literally got rid of their partner. I don't need that. There is this sort of attitude. I don't need him to raise my children. Well, no, because you're working, you don't, but you do. You do need the other, because otherwise you have to try to embody both the masculine and the feminine. And how dangerous is that for our society? And I think by, sort of we are emasculating the masculine, the powerful masculine. We need it. All women need it, because, and all men need it. We need us together. That's why we were created together. Nature has intelligence beyond us that knows that there is a natural order that brings these two elements together so that we can work together, that you can actually find what is happening here, that somebody can actually be involved with the children, look after them, especially in the earlier years. If a father isn't there to contain it, go out into the society and bring things back to feed the children, then the mother's doing everything. Who does she become? How did she cope? That's why perhaps there's more neuroses around, because the anxiety around the single mother to both feed and nurture the child is extraordinary. And the child becomes everything, far too much. And that's sort of the fight between the father and the mother and the child. It's not a real fight in that way. The fight is for the father to take the child away from the mother. The child has to move away from the mother. And this is what this shows, that, Eros has to move away from Aphrodite to become independent. But Psyche has to be strong enough to do that. She has to love him so much in order to do that. And children have to grow away from their parents, but grow away initially from the mother. And that's the father's job, to take the mother into the world effectively.
Yes.
And the blend of the mother and the father, the chaos and the frame, the logos, making sense. What am I feeling? This is what we do in our work. What am I feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling. It's erratic.
Well, I think this is important, but at the same time we are heading into a time where some of these sort of configurations of the nuclear family and the nuclear couple are also very much challenged. And we have different types of families and different configurations, and people don't always stay together. And, and I think it becomes far more complicated about the mother doing everything or the father being emasculated, and we have a complex context that creates all sorts of complications for both men and women, and also couples, same-sex couples, polyamorous couples, different configurations, that we need to see how they're going to work out, and possibly they're going to provide an alternative to the traditional sort of model that we have, which we supposed to be natural, but at the same time it's also very culturally reinforced. So we don't know yet. We don't know. I think we need to be open to the developments of what is happening, which might lead to something new, but at the same time we need to see that what is happening in the process when there is nothing to replace, some of the more traditional sort of ways, and we are in a kind of a limbo and a void of having to create values and systems that are not yet very, very well tested out, and seeing what are the consequences, psychological and social consequences of families disintegrating, of creating new types of families, and how this actually it's only the last 50 years we experience the creation of a new type of family, which is not the nuclear family in a way. And of course, the nuclear family in itself is a recent invention, right? It's not something that existed, let's say, in the 18th century, where there were extended families, or it depended on the class that you were. Sometimes, it wasn't the mother who was doing the upbringing. If she was quite wealthy, it was nannies and nursemaids and others, and she was just overlooking the whole process. So again, we need to look at the history, at the context, at the development of different types of families and different types of ideas. The one thing that is certain, in all of this, is that we cannot do things alone, and we need to incorporate the other in the process, whether that is the other as a masculine, as the feminine, whether there is a kind of the other as the help that you get from nature. Psyche gets help from the ants and the ego, and as symbols of people who can work hard or can keep an eye on us and support us. Or Persephone, another woman who is suffering, right? In order to make her to be a kind of to take pity on her and give her what she wanted in order to fulfill her task and actually achieve the task at the end. So life becomes impossible without help. That's and we need others to help us in this process. We can't do things alone. And we need to depend on others, and that's the truth of any sort of situation that we find.
What I think is incredibly powerful about this, because although many other myths have love in them, Medea and so on, all of them, Hercules, we're yet to do Hercules, they all have these elements of love, but what is so special here is that love does win. And it becomes
yes
of a high standard. It goes into the heavens and creates gods out of it.
I mean, that's why we see it as a kind of I see it as a progression of and a journey of the psyche, starting from that place of beauty, and like a ladder, going up, fulfilling a different task, and completing the work of love and the work of moving beyond one's narcissism to meeting the other and ascending into the realm of God and into immortality. There is something about the immortality of the soul in a way here, which is at stake.
And isn't that what everybody thrives, wants? And I do think the name Eros has been sort of taken away from its true meaning.
And in many ways, we might not. I think the immortality itself, we always battle with death and mortality, and we have its opposite, immortality. But in many ways, the immortality, what survives at the end, what survives death is love, right? The only thing that can survive the onslaught of death and destruction is love. And I think that's what the story is. The only thing that can really survive this constant barrage of jealousy, betrayal, impossibility, hard work, and the catabasis to death is the love and the love that we have for each other. And it's true that love doesn't end when someone dies, right? Our love for them continues.
And at times it can intensify, and the feeling
right.
of the reality of the relationship can drop away. Lots of people forget the dark side of that personality.
Yes. And I think you know, that's the lesson, that somehow, you know, what survives at the end of all this journey, what leads to this immortality, what the remains of the day in a way is love. That's what remains at the end of the day. And if it's love that remains at the end of the day, then you achieve that type of continuation.
And you don't die.
Yes. And in many ways, this is also how the species can survive, you know. If we depend on each other, and Eros and Thanatos are in a constant sort of battle with each other. And, you know, it's only with a union with another that you can defeat Thanatos, you know, otherwise Thanatos has the upper hand. This is
two very powerful themes, aren't they, in psychoanalysis? You know, do we give in to Thanatos, the death principle, or do we go for life? You know, Eros is life. Can we do
And I think this is the battle of the two giants. And, you know, and it's only with a union with another that we can overcome death. And, you know, and even that is not because death will win, but will not have the last say, you know. And that's what is important.
Yeah, but the sadness is, and I know we've got to come to the end shortly, but the sadness is when our life becomes identified through somebody else. So, you know, if somebody has a relationship and they take their own life at the end of the relationship, I've heard about this recently from a young man that said 5 of his friends, 5, all within a short space of time, took their own lives.
Oh my God.
You know, and a number of them had split up from their partners, and they took their own lives. And to me, that is incredibly sad. You know, that there is this element that, as you know, we're talking about Thanatos and Eros, you know, the death, that moment of separation, that moment of breaking that bond, that love tie became something else. It annihilated somebody. Somebody couldn't face it on their own.
Yeah. But also it shows that, you know, whether that tie in itself, that bond, it was used in a quasi-narcissistic way. In a way, it was used in order to keep them sane, to keep them safe, to serve their own needs. And the moment that they used the other, especially, you know, the woman, to save them or to rescue them, or they felt abandoned and bereft, then they couldn't rely on their own resources to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think this is the difficulty, you know, in the moment. If you rely on someone to save you, that person can also, you know, the moment you lose them, then you feel bereft and you have nothing to fall back to. And if you, and this is what is the danger of this sort of this attachment. If you invest in this way, in this kind of narcissistic way, that the other is there to take care of me and to make sure that my anxiety is pacified and to contain me, then you don't learn to do it yourself at all, you know, and then you don't become a parent to yourself, and then eventually when they leave, you feel not simply bereft because you lost someone you love, you live deprived and you feel something was stolen from you. And, you know, you return back to a very infantile, powerless position that you feel helpless and hopeless. And the only way out, perhaps, is death itself. And I think this is something about trying also to create enough sort of resilience, and for someone to not be able to seek relationships as you know, lifeboats, you know. But to see them as something that adds in one's life, not just rescues them from a disaster, from a psychological disaster.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about here is the most important element, because it's so easy to jump into relationships nowadays. There used to be this sort of element of courting. The family were involved. Take your time, get to know somebody.
That's right. Don't jump into a relationship as a way of avoiding your own sort of anxiety about being alone, and try to face your loneliness and your anxiety around that. What does it mean? Your boredom, your loneliness. And that's why perhaps people resort to addictions and porn, because it's very hard to. And of course, there is a whole social system that reinforces that accountability, that there must be something wrong with you if you're alone. There must be something wrong that you are not out there increasing your relationship capital, and you don't become really successful in having a lot of partners, or being an alpha male, or this or that, or being a very attractive woman, or having all of these, these conquests. And I think in many ways, it also reinforces it, says that you are somehow a loser if you are alone, instead of seeing the values of solitude. And that actually you need solitude in order to be creative sometimes. You need not to have this constant sort of expenditure onto the other in order to be able to withdraw some of the energy and invest it in something that is creative. And of course, creativity can happen with others, but not when the other becomes simply another sort of investment, capital investment, which increases your value. Being a high value man or a high value woman, which actually, I find quite despicable as terms, right? Instead of saying, well, we are all more human than otherwise, and we all struggle with our difficulties, and we are not there to increase our capital. We are there actually to make connections with others. And it's very hard. I mean, in many ways, the myth is so important, because this is not about becoming a high value anything. This is about going through hell and back to get someone that is important for you.
Yeah, and that's that union of Eros, the masculine, and the feminine. Have gone through. He's been disappointed. He's had to separate from the mother, but he's been disappointed and has run away. He comes back. He's forgiven her. She's found her way, and she's had to go into the depths and divest some of her beauty, some of her nature, look at herself. But that, once we have done that, the marriage of the sun and the moon, alchemically, once we have managed to do that within ourselves, it changes our relationship within ourselves.
Yes. And then we meet the other not as simply a complement, as something that will make us whole, but something that adds already to our own sort of journey. And I think each of them needs to go through a journey. Eros himself to grow up a little bit, not be mama's boy, right? And for Psyche to actually face the avoid the cruelty of the gaze of the other who sees you only as beautiful, but also the cruelty of her father, who says as long as he's married, it doesn't matter if he's married to a serpent king. And you think, is this all that your daughter? This is your love for your daughter, just to be, But this is also the difficulty that Psyche has to face. Also the betrayal of her parents. The betrayal of your sisters, the betrayal of your parents, the betrayal of the world around. That she needs actually to find herself in this isolation and facing the tasks which will actually transform her, not in connection with a world that lets her down, but in connection with something that is valuable to her, her own love, that will transform her. And the connection perhaps with another disappointed woman, Persephone, that was also punished for not doing anything wrong herself.
Exactly, right? But you still got to accommodate, as you say, the family, and every family has their own intention. The father has his, her mother didn't come into play to protect her
at all.
The sisters were sort of, in a way, they were trying to open her eyes, were both defensive and
they were all having good intentions, right? But look, what happens when people have good intentions.
However, what I do like is at the end, and I think this is where we should end, is on when you can go through that journey, either individually or as a couple, and realize that there is a love somewhere there is a higher power. And maybe it can't exist here, but we should strive for that, to strive for something better. I like that idea. So the people often say when they go through therapy, oh, I've individuated, or I'm whole. And to me, maybe it's my interpretation, but I don't think anybody's whole while they're alive. This is our human condition, to keep striving, to move forward, to keep doing things, to recreate ourselves, to be creative, to find our nature and make something greater of it if we can.
Exactly.
It always comes with a price.
No, absolutely.
The price for freedom or the price for creativity, but keep going, keep striving, and sort of try to aim for something greater than you are. Would be a nice
absolutely. Yeah.
So Dr. Anastasios Getinides, thank you again for Eros and Psyche, and for anybody who's listening, please get in touch and let us know if there's any other myths, but I think this has been quite one of the most powerful myths we could be talking about.
Absolutely.
Until
Thank you,
next time.
Maria.
Take care.
Thank you. It's a
Bye.
pleasure. Bye-bye.